Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast, where we inspire you, Torah-Observant believers, to thrive as peculiar people in a modern world. And today we're doing that by interviewing Pastor Lee Horne of Restoration Ranch Ministries in Florida. And what this ministry does is it takes in ex-convicts that are coming right out of prison, and it teaches them what Lee calls man skills. They're teaching them all sorts of construction and restoration of buildings, and at the same time, they're going to restore them spiritually. And they're going to help them understand the Bible and break free of addiction. And so that is what they do. And Pastor Lee has his own amazing story of how he spent 5 years in prison for drug smuggling, and how he came to salvation and the Torah in prison and came out to run this halfway house. Before we get into this episode, let me give you a little message about our sponsor, Azure Standard. Azure Standard is an organic food production and distribution company owned by Torah-Observant believers. That means that they vet all the things on their site so that none of them have unclean ingredients according to Leviticus 11. That's a huge deal, because then you're not going to have to spend all of your time looking and Googling and searching, does this have pork gelatin in it? And that's especially important when you're thinking about supplements. Azure Well is a new line of supplements released by Azure Standard, and they were curated and put together by Dr. Alfonso Manzo III. He was on one of our podcasts, and he was in the documentary The Way. The coolest thing about this supplement line is that they are not synthetic vitamins and minerals. They're whole food-based vitamins and minerals. And so what that means is that they're real fruits, okay? He puts real fruits and vegetables in these things so that it's as close to the way that Yah created it as possible. Manzo also says synthetic vitamin D is like a steroid and it's horrible for you. He recommended to me this Alaskan cod liver oil, which naturally has vitamin D in it. That's just in the cod liver oil. So there's your vitamin D. Here's the rest of your vitamins. He even puts copper in here. He says it's the little known ingredient that we're all missing. You can go to azurestandard.com and put in code THELIFE15 and get 15% off your first order of $100 or more, and support David Stelzer, the Torah-Observant owner of Azure Standard, who has already done all the legwork for you to make sure that all the products that you're consuming are clean according to the Bible. So what are you waiting for? Go to azurestandard.com, put in code THELIFE15, and save 15% on your first order of $100 or more. Thank you so much for watching the Life Podcast. If you enjoy it, please like, share, and subscribe to help further the cause. Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Life Podcast.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
We're out here in Florida, not super close to your place, but I'm glad we're in person. I'm glad it's 73 degrees or whatever it is. Can you start out by introducing yourself and telling people who is Lee Horne?
Okay. My name is Lee Horne, but I'm known by a lot of people in this faith or in ministry by Pastor Lee from Restoration Ranch Ministry. I was a very wild and rebellious kid. My dad wasn't around in my younger years, and I just didn't have a lot of steady structure and a father to put down on me when I needed it. And my mother, she worked nights a lot to make more money as a traveling nurse, or she was a registered nurse, but she made more money at night. So there were times when my brother and I didn't have a lot of supervision. But when I was just going through school, I was they told me I had ADD and ADHD, but I think I was just really hyperactive and needed some attention. I don't really agree with the chemical theory of ADHD. I think it's more of a character trait. That's my opinion.
I agree.
I was just always getting in trouble because I was seeking attention. But I did get picked on quite a bit in my younger years and bullied. I wasn't the popular kid. And later on in life, I realized that my drug usage was trying to balance out all of those things that I went through when I was young. But I'll touch on that a little later. But
and you grew up in Florida.
Well, I moved around a lot. It was actually South Georgia, and a little later ended up in Tallahassee. But I've spent a little time in North Carolina and South Florida and different places in South Georgia. Just moved around a lot. Didn't have a steady place to call home for a long period of time. But a lot of my family is in South Georgia.
Okay.
So just
okay.
Being bad, getting in trouble, stealing, everything you can think of, shoplifting, and but eventually around the age of 15, I started getting into drugs, smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and it just escalated from there. And for some reason, any drug I ever tried, I just got involved in selling it. From the first joint I smoked to every other drug I did, immediately got a bigger quantity, started selling it in smaller quantities to support my habit, make money. And
you're an entrepreneur from the start.
Yeah, something like that. Using my talents for the wrong team, I would say. But after high school, that's when everything really just, and I didn't graduate from high school. I wasn't making it to high school on time, or I wasn't making it at all. And 6 weeks before graduation, they told me, you're not going to make it. You've got too many tardies, too many absences. You're not going to graduate from high school. You're dismissed. So then I started getting into cocaine and ecstasy and acid and mushrooms and all the different club drugs. And again, if I could find it in larger quantities, I was, selling it and moving it around. And I had people that were giving me like large quantities of ecstasy to sell for them. And for some reason, they decided to concoct a batch of ecstasy that was mixed with other things. It had methamphetamines, PCP, and MDMA, and it made me lose my mind. I was hearing things and just delusional, and I thought God was talking to me. And when the cops, my dad actually called 911 because he knew something was seriously wrong with me. And when they got there, it took about 6 officers to handcuff me, and I was belligerent, just rowdy. And they took me to the hospital, and during this time I was actually changing my voice, like, get off of me, leave me alone.
Really?
Yeah. And it took every one of them to hold me down and sedate me. And I was probably weighed 160 pounds, but I was wild as a buck. And
wow.
my kidneys shut down from all of the drugs that were in my system, and not eating, and whatever this new pill was, it just sent my body into shock. So they put me into a drug-induced coma until my body could be revived or whatever. So when I woke up, I was in the mental hospital and I couldn't speak. People would talk to me, but I couldn't talk back. And several weeks went by. They put me on some heavy psych meds, Halidol and Cogentin, and they would bring me into the doctor's office and ask me if I could talk. And I was trying to, but I couldn't get the words out. And they'd bring me back in a couple weeks later and ask me if I could talk, and I would might say one word, and then they would say, okay, he's in there. We're going to bring him back again. And they would just keep bringing me back until I could form sentences and communicate. And I was in there for months in the mental hospital, waiting to regain reality and to be able to speak again. And I don't remember all of it, but I remember, my family coming to visit me, and I remember just looking around at all these people that were just completely gone, that couldn't talk and that were out of their mind. And I was wondering in myself, am I going to be like this? Am I going to come out of this? And I remember asking one of the counselors there about a lady that was just, rambling on. And I said, is she ever going to come back from this? And she said, no, she's going to be like this for the rest of her life. And, so anyway, I got out of there, and, it didn't change anything. I went right back to drugs and selling drugs. It didn't slow me down. It was maybe a small gap of sobriety in there trying to get my life right, but, it didn't work. And, it was a little while later, I was actually talking to somebody about that experience with the bad drugs. And I've had a few encounters with the Spirit before, like feeling his presence. So I knew what it felt like. And maybe it would be a good time to say that when I was like 4 years old, my grandmother told me that Christ died for my sins. And I believe that. But nobody ever taught me about repentance or surrender or salvation, and that's one of my biggest things now is in addition to telling people what he's done for us, we need to tell people what he wants us to do for him, because until a person surrenders their life to him, they're not going to experience his fullness and everything that comes with salvation and walking with him. But anyway, so while we were talking about that experience, I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit, and it was like powerful. And the guy I was talking to said, what's going on with you? Because I just like, I said, man, I feel his presence all over me right now. And we were actually talking about him, like, because I thought God was talking to me through this experience. And while we're talking about this, whether it was a spiritual experience or not, all of a sudden I have a spiritual experience while talking about it. And it was so powerful that I told everybody around me, I want to be clean. Stay away from me with negativity, with drugs. I told my girlfriend at the time that I didn't want to have any type of non-marital, relations. And I was telling people that I was having a God experience, and I was shunned by everyone. And I went from living in a nice townhouse with a girlfriend and a lot of friends to homeless within a couple days, because everybody said, you're crazy, you're going through an episode. I'm like, no, this is actually coming from a real experience that I had. It's not like that other episode, but they're thinking it's like the other episode that you had. You see what I'm saying? So I called my dad and I said, Daddy, I really want to change my life. I want to get everything back together. I've had an encounter with God. He's like, you're on drugs. You're on drugs again. I'm like, no, I'm for real. I really want to change my life. So everybody turned their back on me because I did want to change.
And now a word from our sponsor.
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by The Way documentary, The Truth, Reformation 2.0 Apologetics book, and Truth Tracks. The Way documentary tells the story of our movement. This is the story of people who were trading Easter ham for Passover lamb and Sunday church for Saturday Sabbath, all in an effort to live like their Savior. It dives into their stories through their own voices and into the history and theology that show how the church got to where it is today. The Truth, Reformation 2.0 is the only book of its kind, an all-encompassing theological treatise that answers every question a mainstream Christian might have about why you want to keep Torah. And finally, Truth Tracks are small comics, beautifully illustrated, that use stories and scripture to remind Christians that once we are saved by grace through faith, we are called to live and do the instructions of Yah, his Torah. If you want to learn more about any of these products, go to thewaydoc.com. That's theway, DOC, like documentary.com.
And now back to the show.
But again, I didn't understand the process of complete surrender and salvation. I was just going on my gut from this experience that I had. So everybody turned their backs on me. I'm in the homeless shelter. And I do need to mention one other thing. Somebody was trying to help me shortly after high school, and they took me to a Seventh-day Adventist retreat. And while I was there, I heard about the Sabbath, and it made sense that the Sabbath was still valid, and they were explaining the dietary instructions and things like that, and that seemed to make sense. But of course, I never surrendered my life. It was just a few days. So when I got to this point that I was homeless and I wanted to help, it's just made sense to reach out to a Sabbath keeping church. So I ended up walking miles and miles and miles to this Adventist church just to fall down on my hands and knees and tell them, please help me, because everybody's turned their backs on me and I'm homeless and I don't know where to go. So that's exactly what I did. I went to this church, and as soon as I got to the door, I was exhausted, hadn't eaten in days, and I was probably a little loopy at this point because I was coming off of things. And so anyway, I just fell down on my hands and knees and asked them to please help me. And they called the pastor and said, there's some weird guy that just came in and fell down on his hands and knees in the church, and he wants help. And so the pastor came out and said, we'll help you, but we want to see you making an effort to come here and to learn. And I was like, okay. And there was a battle going on during this time. And I ended up staying just through mutual friends, introduced me to somebody, and I ended up at this house where there was witchcraft going on. One of the people that stayed there was involved in Wicca and crystals and candles and all kinds of weird stuff. And at the same time that I'm in this house that has all kinds of drug activity going on, I'm trying to make it to this church so that they would help me and see that I was for real. And I did have a mental episode during this time while I was staying in this house. And I remember the girl that stayed there said, I have some people that want to meet with you. And I'm like, okay. And it was a table full of people dressed in all dark clothing and like a gothic type look to them. And they're asking me all kinds of questions like I'm being interviewed. And I just remembered saying sarcastic things to them. And I don't know why. And I remember them looking at each other saying, he's worse than we thought he was. And I think they were trying to fish for whatever type of spirit was on me, in me. I don't know. It was just weird. So they ended up asking me if I would go to another place that somebody wanted to meet me. And I was like, okay. So they took me to this bar, like it was like a pool hall bar, several hours away from where I was living. And they said, just wait here, somebody's going to come out. And this woman came out, and she looked at me and said, why are you here? I don't know why I said what I said, but I said, I'm trying to get back to my mother. And she looked at the people that brought me and said, quit wasting my time, and turned around and went back in. I don't know why she asked me that, and I don't know why I responded the way I did. But I'm thinking I had something on me, and they knew I had something on me or in me. I don't know. So anyway, this pastor finally said, we need to get you out of this area. We're going to send you to a place called Faith Farm. It's in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And it's a Christian rejuvenation program. And one of the first church services that I went to there was an evangelist that had come. And when he came into the church, everybody, you could see them move. And we looked at each other and was like, did you feel that? Like you could feel the anointing on this guy. You feel the presence on him. And so he asked at the end of the service if anybody wanted prayer. And I was on psych meds at this point in time, and I didn't feel normal. And I felt weak, and I just really wanted to be off of the psych meds. And so I went up to the front with probably maybe 10 or 12 other guys. And he said, "What do you want prayer for?" And I said, I'm on these psych meds. I really want to come off of the psych meds, and I want my mind to come back to normal. And he reached out to put his hand on me, but before he even touched me, I passed out, and I was on the ground. And I was knocked out, asleep. And I guess a couple minutes later, when I woke up, I had tears coming out of my eyes. I was crying in my sleep. And I couldn't move anything. And I told them, I said, "I can't move. I can't feel anything." And they said, "Well, just stay down." So it was a couple minutes later, I started to feel movement, and I could get up, and I got up. And I went to my room, and I took the psych meds, and I threw them in the trash. And I've been normal ever since, somewhat. But so
wow,
I actually got kicked out of that program because I wasn't making it to class on time, and I would fall asleep during class, and they could just tell that it really wasn't first priority. And so I got ejected from the program down in Fort Lauderdale, and immediately just ran into somebody that got me back into smoking pot. And then from there, escalated. And in a very short period of time, I'm down there with more connections than I ever had. And so now, I would say within a year, I started moving large amounts of cocaine and ecstasy and marijuana and LSD and anything else I could get my hands on, and just moving it to South Georgia and North Florida, where I came from. And that just continued and escalated more and more. And I was in Tallahassee. And by the way, I would stay up for 2 or 3 days on drugs, take a nap, wake up and do it again. 2 or 3 days of partying, clubbing, and just sleeping as much as I need to, not eating good, other than, eating drugs and drinking alcohol and snorting cocaine. And I never stayed on one specific thing. I was always flopping back and forth. Like, I would stay on alcohol and cocaine for a few days, and I'd get bored with it, and then I'd be on pills or psychedelics for a few days, and then I'd go off into mushrooms. And, I don't know if that was a benefit to not get me stuck on one thing all the time, or if it kept me from getting stuck on one thing by doing so many different things. I don't know.
How old are you at this point, roughly?
24 at this point in the story.
And this is after you're saved, you come to Jesus.
No. I haven't been saved. Okay. No. You just had that. I just had some experiences. Just had experiences. Yeah, that was it. I didn't do the sinner's prayer, and I didn't ask him to come into my heart. Like, I didn't even understand that really at that point.
Okay.
So even when I went to this program, the only thing I got out of that program in the first couple months that I was there was memorize these verses. That's it. Memorize these verses. Okay. So I remember the Romans road, I remembered it, and I'll get to that turning point here in just a minute.
Sure. No rush. I just was asking.
Yeah. So I, other than having some experiences and believing that he was real, I never had that life-changing, heart change experience. So I was riding down Monroe Street in Tallahassee, and I was paranoid. I was looking in the rearview mirror, driving around the block 3 or 4 times before I would get to my destination to make sure I wasn't being followed. My whole life just revolved around getting more drugs, selling drugs, and staying high and keeping everybody around me high. And it's like the reverse of what I'm supposed to be doing now. Now I sell the gospel. Now I want everybody to be filled with the happiness, joy, and peace from the Holy Spirit, not the drugs. And so I was using all my talents for the wrong team. Satan was using my personality, for bad instead of using it for good. So anyway, I was paranoid, and I just saw this church and just pulled over one day. And, there's a song that says, Jesus, take the wheel. I think he did that day. But I pulled in there, and there was a guy out doing the yard at the church. And I said, is there a pastor or a counselor or somebody here that I can talk to? And he said, no, there's nobody here. And I really wanted help. So I said, can I go inside and pray? And he said, sure. So I went into this church, and I just fell down on my hands and knees in the aisle. And I looked up at the ceiling of the church, and I said, if you're really there, please take me out of this life. I'm tired of living this way. I have no power over my addiction. I can't stop. And if you're really there, please take me out. And I'm not asking for death. I'm asking to just be taken out of that situation, out of that life that I was living. Got up and forgot that it ever happened, and went right back to, same old me. And not too long after that, I got arrested. And my first night in jail, and they got me pretty good. They got me with a lot of cocaine and ecstasy and marijuana and GHB and LSD, and I had it in suitcases, moving it from South Florida to North Florida. And my first night in jail, I lay down in the bunk, and I looked up at the bunk above me, and there was a Celtic cross. Somebody had drawn a cross underneath the bunk, and it was an exact duplicate of the cross I had tattooed on my back. And I don't know why I had it tattooed on my back. I guess because I thought I was a believer, even though I wasn't a surrendered follower. I just, for some reason, I was deceived into thinking just because I believed that he existed, I was somehow saved, or I was in there. But anyway, when I saw that cross, there was a verse underneath it that said, forget those things that are behind and reach forward to the prize that is ahead. And as soon as I read that verse, the Spirit hit me, and I fell down on my hands and knees in the jail cell. And I can only explain it like it was some type of Pentecost moment. I felt waves of power splashing down on my back. Like, the only way I can describe it is waves and power. And I was crying and snotting, and this officer came by, and he sees me on my hands and knees crying and snotting and praising God. He said, are you okay? I don't remember exactly what I said, but I was basically letting him know that I was having a divine appointment. And I heard him say, yeah, we got a crazy one in here, y'all. And he showed me in my mind's eye of me in that church, asking to be taken out of this life. And he spoke to my heart, and he said, this is what you asked for. And I was so touched that he reached out to me to tell me that my prayers were heard. It just had an amazing impact on me of just how real he is. And when I finally got to the main pod where I was going to spend the next 8 months in jail, it happened to be the only pod in the whole jail that had church 7 days a week. And it was ran by the inmates. They actually had their own services in there. So I sat down in front of the TV, my first day in the main pod. And as soon as I sat in front of the TV, I started hearing songs of praise, like church singing. And immediately I just got up, and I was drawn to that music. And they were in there just, singing and praising. And as soon as I walked into the room, I just started bawling. I couldn't even talk. I was crying and snotting so bad. And the guy that was leading the church group just stopped and looked at me. He said, "You're ready to surrender, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." And that's the moment. I didn't need anybody to explain it to me. I realized he wanted me, all of me, and he wanted me to completely surrender to him. And I realized that jail didn't change me, and hospitals didn't change me. Near-death experiences didn't change me. The psych ward didn't change me. My parents couldn't change me. But he was the only thing I hadn't tried completely. So that day, I told him, I surrender everything to you. I want to live for you, whatever that looks like. I'm all in. And that is when amazing things started to happen. I wanted to be clean. I wanted to be pure. I wanted to be holy. And I didn't even know the Bible. I just knew it, that he wanted me to live for him and to be separate from him, for him. So I was sentenced to 5 years and 7 months in prison. And I spent the next 5 years and 7 months in prison studying the Bible and religion. And I studied Catholicism and Jehovah's Witnessism and Seventh-day Adventism and all of the Protestant denominations. They called me the Bible guy. That's all I did. I stayed on my bunk and I studied the Word and other people's interpretations of the Word. And if I was off my bunk, I was generally talking to somebody about the Word. And I had a really blessed family that would send me books, research materials, concordances, and thesauruses, and I had more books than anything. I probably had more books than any other inmate in prison. My locker was just nothing but books. And there was an officer that I was talking to one time, and he said, "You're going into the ministry." And I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, I just sense it. And I said, "Well, how do I know that?" And he said, "Just pray and ask for confirmation if that's what he wants you to do." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Father, if you want me to go into the ministry, I need you to tell me and give me confirmation." And a day or two later, I was in Bible study, and I just had a inner voice in my conscience said, "Look up the word preach." And my parents had just sent me this new Bible. And I flipped to the word index in the back and looked up the word preach. And it said it was on page 337. And immediately that grabbed my attention because that's my name upside down, Lee. And that was a number that back when pagers were popular, that was my code, 337. So people would know who I was. Then that same voice said, "Look up the word minister." So I flipped over in my Bible to the word minister, and this is a brand new Bible, but it was folded right through the word minister. And that page didn't get cut in the printing press. So before the pages got cut, that one page was folded right through the word minister. And I was like, man, that's crazy. And several other things happened like that, but I was convinced that that's what he wanted me to do. And for the next 5 years and 7 months, or through the duration of my incarceration, that number just kept popping up over and over and over and over and over. And I think what he was telling me to do was preach, because preach 337. And people would say, "Hey, what time do you got?" And I'd say 337. Or I would wake up in the middle of the night, look at my watch, it'd be 337. And I was actually put in confinement for not cooking oatmeal on the Sabbath. And while I was in there, right before I went to sleep, I heard that voice, and that voice said, "At 337, you're going to feel my glory." And I was like, am I talking to myself? Went to sleep, woke up at 3:36, and as soon as I looked at my watch, it turned 3:37, and that spirit hit me hard, just like it did the first day I was in there. And I realized a little later, I didn't even put two and two together, but my birthday is 3/30/78. The first three whole numbers are 337. I looked at my birth certificate later, and I was 7 pounds 14 ounces. That's 3 sevens. I was 21 inches long. That's 3 sevens. And I was born at 11/32. You add all those numbers up, that's 7. It's just strange coincidences about that number, but it plays out much bigger a little later on in the story. So in 2007, somebody offered me a job at the wastewater treatment plant in the prison. And I told them I wasn't really interested in working out there at the sewer plant. And they said, well, you'll have your own office, and you won't be around officers or inmates. And I said, man, sign me up. So for the next couple years, I was at a camp where I was studying my Bible, had my own office out at the wastewater treatment plant. And I ended up getting a wastewater license, which at first I was like, no, I'm going into ministry. I don't need a wastewater license. I know I'm called to ministry, but I prayed about that, and I got confirmations again that I needed to do it. So got my wastewater treatment plant license, went back to school and got my drinking water license. And so when I got out, I had a really hard time finding a job. Nobody wanted to call me in for an interview. Nobody wanted to even speak to me. And I called a few of them and asked, like, why did I not get a phone call or interview? They said, you're a drug dealer. We don't want your kind here. And there's no law protecting me against people discriminating against my past. They don't have to hire you. So anyway, it was a year and a half went by, and I finally got a call. And they were in the process of building a $22 million wastewater plant from the ground up. And they called and asked me to come in for an interview. And on my application, it said, tell us about yourself. And I said, the Bible is my faith. Nothing comes before the Bible. And the mayor used to be a preacher. And he said, that's the man for the job right there. So I got the job as a supervisor over this brand new wastewater plant that was still in construction. I stayed there for 8 years and had inmates under me. I was teaching them how to be a wastewater operator. And I had an employee under me also. And it was a great job. It was a very trying time. So I was looking for a place to stay in the area around this wastewater treatment plant, because I was driving over an hour to get there. And the boss let me put a camper on the property. I found a camper for $300, and I stayed in the camper while I was looking for a place nearby, and found a foreclosed farm about 17 miles from the job, and got a USDA loan that I got approved for. It was called Rural Development. It was for people that might have a good job but not have the greatest credit and never owned a home, and they financed 103% of the house. So financed the whole thing plus some of the closing costs. And so that camper, I decided to start housing men in the camper. And so I was going into the prisons and doing Bible studies at this time. So, I mean, right out of prison, I immediately got involved in ministry and doing ministry things. And I ended up going to the Congregation of Yahweh in Panama City, Florida. Oh, I skipped over a detail. I apologize. My wastewater boss in prison, I heard him talking about Yahweh and Yahshua. And he said that his brother had told him that daddy was going crazy And Daddy is starting to talk about Yahweh and Yeshua and feast days and stuff like that. So he set out to find out why his daddy was crazy or not. He researched it. He told his brother, he said, Daddy's not crazy. That's the truth. That's his real name. And this guy was heathen, but he was witnessing to me about, the truth. So I started, studying those things, because every doctrine I ran into while I was, and there's every division you can think of, and probably some more in prison. Everything I heard, I challenged. Every viewpoint, I studied it out. I read the materials that these adherents would give me, their pamphlets, their, trying to find out why they believed what they did. And so when I ran into, this was in 2007, I started getting things like back-to-back confirmations. I had this little Walkman, and I had a copper wire attached to it, to a copper pole, and I was picking up radio stations from Texas. And I picked up this radio station on the AM, and the first thing I heard this guy talk, I could tell it was a sermon, and the first thing I heard him say was the feast days of the Lord, the feast days. And I was like, wow, that's what, this guy was just telling me about. And then I ran into another inmate that was talking about the feast days and Yahweh and Yeshua. And I looked down in the trash can, and there was a sacred name broadcaster sitting on top of the trash. And the title of it was October 2007. Should we keep the feasts of Yahweh or Halloween? And so I picked it up and I read it, and I was like, man, he's trying to tell me something, because I keep hearing his name, and I keep hearing about his feasts over and over and over through different sources, not connected whatsoever. So I was previously taught that the feasts were nailed to the cross from Colossians chapter 2. And I said, Father, if you're trying to tell me something about your feasts, you're going to have to explain to me Colossians chapter 2, because as far as I know, they're nailed to the cross, and they were just shadows. And now that the body came, we don't need the shadows anymore. And so I kept reading that chapter and praying about it over and over and over. And then one word just popped out on the page, and it said, these things are a shadow of things to come. And my mind was telling me they were a shadow. But are means future tense, meaning they're a shadow of things still in the future, things to come. And a lot of people, even people in this walk, they'll say, well, the spring feasts have been fulfilled. Or some mainstream Christian people might say, well, all the feasts have been fulfilled. And then he showed me Luke 22. He said, with desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you, and I will not eat it until it be fulfilled in the kingdom. So out of the Messiah's own mouth, the first feast is not even fulfilled until he eats it in the kingdom. None of the feasts. We see some elements of the feast have, like, the Passover lamb, but guess what? Everybody doesn't have the blood on their doorpost yet. Death hasn't passed over everybody yet. Everybody hasn't made it through the Red Sea of baptism yet. Everybody hasn't made it to Sinai to learn his commandments yet. So I see the feasts as the plan of salvation, but until everybody goes through the process, it's not fulfilled.
I think you're right. And I watched a video that you made on YouTube, and it was partly about your testimony, but I think there was a point when you talked about Colossians 2, and you had more to say about it, and I can't remember what it was.
Oh, yeah.
And I had written this down to ask you, but
Yeah. A lot of people, they interpret what was nailed to the cross. Some people want to nail the Mosaic law to the cross. Some people want to nail the ceremonial law to the cross. Well, what was actually nailed there? Some people in this walk, in our walk, say, oh, that's the rabbi's traditional law that was nailed to the cross. But the verse right before it explains it. It says, having forgiven all of your trespasses by blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us. His law is not against you until you break it. So it was our sins that was nailed to the cross. It says, he who knew no sin became sin for us. And what happened when he became sin for us? He was nailed to the cross. So our sins were nailed there. And it's right there in the verse right before it. And also, it says, these things are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Messiah. The word is not there. And I'm pretty sure what he's doing is he's finishing up a thought process. The verse right before it says, let no man judge you in this and this and this and this and this, but the body of Messiah. Let no one judge you but the body of Messiah. We judge things in the body, and Yahweh judges those that are without. So people interpret that as these things are a shadow, but the essence or whatever is the Messiah. Christ. And they're looking at it as the Messiah is casting a shadow, and the feast and everything are the shadow that leads up to him. And now that we got him, we don't need the shadow. But I think the word is doesn't belong there. And he's finishing up what he started in the previous verse. Don't let anyone judge you in meat and drink and because there are shadow things to come, but judge things in the body. So,
okay. And while we're on the subject, I had another question for you. When you got in trouble in prison, and they said because you weren't cooking oatmeal on the Sabbath day, were you keeping the Sabbath day at that point because of your interaction with Seventh-day Adventists?
Yes. I would say I considered myself an Adventist all the way up from 2003 all the way to 2007. The majority of my studies and research materials were from Adventist background. Okay. And my stepdad actually became my stepdad was an Adventist. My mom married an Adventist. So I was getting a lot of material from the Adventist faith. But as soon as I started getting into the feasts, that's when there was a little bit of conflict between me and, Adventist interpretation, because they were the group that nailed them to the cross. They nail everything ceremonial to the cross. They divide ceremonial and moral, and they say everything ceremonial was nailed to the cross. And then Ephesians chapter 2, when it says, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances for to make the two into one, it's talking about the traditional laws that separated the Jews and the Gentiles, but they lump in the ceremonial laws with that too. So when I ran into understanding about Yahweh and Yeshua and the feast days, then I had a problem. And remember, I'm challenging everything up until this point, and the Adventist faith made the most sense to me. But then when I was convinced that his feasts were still valid, then I started to challenge what I was believing in the Adventist faith. And they believe that during the 1,000 years, nobody will be here. The earth will be empty. And it says that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years so that he won't deceive the nations. Well, that tells me there's nations here. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, he'll be loose to try to go deceive them again. So then I had another problem with what I had been taught, and which, I hear the Sabbath is a stepping stone for many, many, many people in this faith, and I'm thankful that I ran into them. I just found that there was more to the story, and they lean heavily on Ellen White to the point of almost everything she wrote is scripture. But even she had some interpretations that the feasts were nailed to the cross.
Okay.
So I was actually at the Panama City Work Release Center. That's where I was at when I found out about the Congregation of Yahweh in Panama City, Florida.
Okay.
So I started going there in March of 2009. It's they're still functioning today, and I'm still real close to them. And eventually they asked me to speak there, and I became kind of like the assistant pastor there and would speak regularly there. And back to the farm and the guys staying in the camper, that grew, and I started putting guys in the house with me, and eventually there were so many guys in my house that I had to get out of the house. So I moved back into a camper, and I was living in a camper while the ministry continued to grow. And at this point in time, we started off with some chickens, and then some goats, and then some cows, and the guys that I was helping in the ministry would help with the farm animals and stuff. And that continued to grow.
And the reason that you sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the reason that you even started housing them in the RV was because you were passionate about helping guys that were basically had been in the situation you had been in?
It actually, I think it got spoken into existence because before I even got out of prison, I was telling people in prison to look me up when you get out because I'm going to run a halfway house one day.
Okay.
I was telling people that I'm going to have, I didn't know what it looked like, but I said one of these days I'm going to be helping people out of prison. So look me up. You know, I ran into a lot of people that weren't getting out for 15, 20, 30 or more years, but I was telling them to look me up.
So, all right, all these guys are coming to the camper. You had to move into the camper now, and they're all in the house.
Yeah.
And they're helping with the farm.
Yeah. And the reason we got into just having eggs and milk was, you know, the different ministries were talking about the blood red moons and how things were about to just unfold. And it was just kind of an instinct. Well, we got this land. We might as well raise a little bit of our own food. And that just continued to grow until we're producing way more food than we need. And we decided to start putting it on the market. So we had
That's awesome.
a herd of Jersey cows. We had Kiko goats for meat. We had Alpine goats for milk, meat chickens, egg chickens, and over 100 beehives. And we were, you know, harvesting the honey, and we had over 300 customers that we were delivering raw milk and cheese and Amish jams and honey, and occasionally we would, you know, do garden vegetables, and we just all kinds of things. But
how many guys are there at a time?
the most we had
usually?
was 22 people.
And they're all working the farm and like making this stuff roll.
And we, we started doing like landscaping and stuff and little handyman things in the community. And I had been just stocking up on tools and lawn equipment and, you know, just things that I felt like one day I was going to be going into just doing that full time and not working at the wastewater treatment plant. But I didn't know how it was going to play out. But I learned how to fix a pump at my job, a wastewater pump. And there wasn't anybody in our area that knew how to fix this pump. And a town about 20 minutes from where I worked called the pump manufacturer and said, is there anybody that knows how to fix these pumps? We have hundreds of them and people are just throwing them away, and we got some on the trash pile, and they're like, you know, $2,500 pumps just going to the trash, and people are having to buy different pumps. And they said, well, call this guy named Lee. He's right down the road from y'all. So they asked me to come over for a visit, and I just started pulling pumps out of the trash and fixing them for like $200, $300. And they've already told the homeowners to buy more. So after fixing a few of their pumps, they asked me how much money I would want to come work for them, for their city. And I told them, I said, well, I run the whole operation over here in this other town. I don't have anybody over me, and I've got really good benefits. I don't think you guys are, you know, going to want to compete with that. They said, just give us some numbers and we'll see. I said, okay, I'll work for 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, $25 an hour with the same benefits. And several of them was hiring. And they were going to vote on it. And I already had 2 council members said hire him. I only needed 1 more. And one of the head honchos on the council called me and said, I think you would be a blessing here, but I'm just letting you know you're coming under fire because you're a threat to some people. because all these things that you claim that you can do, there's people that don't want you here because they can't do what you can do.
Oh.
So I told my boss, I said, I just want to let you know that there's a town down the road. They want to hire me and give me a 4-day schedule and give me the same benefits and everything. And I'm just letting you know I'm considering it. I've already got 2 votes. I only need 1 more vote. And he said, well, I'll give you a 4-day schedule. I'll give you a company truck. I'll put you through electrician school. I'll give you a raise. And I don't want you to go over there. I was like, okay, I'll stay. So I was just so excited that a convicted drug trafficker could be in a position like that, where 2 towns would compete, to keep him there. So I shared my testimony on Facebook, and I just shared, what he had done for me and where I'd come from. And that post was shared over 100,000 times in just a few weeks.
Wow.
And I just started friending people. People were reaching out to me and asking about Restoration Ranch ministry and how to get involved. And a girl from Tennessee friended me. And when I saw her, it was like I knew her. It was just weird. She had like a familiar face. And so I reached out to her, and I went from maybe 400 friends to 4,000 friends in just a couple weeks. And but there was just something about her. And so I reached out to her and I asked her if she was married or had kids. And she said no, she's never been married, never had kids, and she had been single for over 10 years waiting on the right man to come along. And I was like, wow, that's patience. And so we talked, and I just felt led to go meet her, but I wanted confirmation. I wanted to know that it was from him. So I remember we were about to do the bread and the wine ceremony for Passover, and I was thinking about, she had long, pretty blonde hair, and I was thinking about that verse that says a woman's hair is her glory. And I don't know why I was thinking about that verse, just thinking about the verse and her hair for some reason. And a couple of days later, we had been talking, and I said, Father, if you want me to go meet her and pursue her, I need a sign. And he spoke with that inner voice again, and he said, your answer's in the book. And I was like, what book? And I didn't have a book right beside me, so I just didn't think about it, went to bed, fell asleep. The next day I was walking by the office, and there was a Bible open on the desk. Somebody had left it there. And there was a DVD right in the center of it. And as soon as I looked at the Bible, I heard it again, your answer's in the book. So I went over and looked at the Bible, and the left side of the Bible was through the verse, a woman's hair is her glory. And the right side was going through the bread and the wine ceremony. And I was like, no way. Because that's when I asked him, to reveal it to me. And I asked for several confirmations. And to the point that he finally said, stop asking. This is for me. But she was hesitant and weirded out and just didn't make sense for some random stranger on Facebook whose post just went viral to all of a sudden want to come meet her, And her boss had actually shared the testimony with her. And so a church about 30 minutes from her house asked me to come speak. And I was like, man, if you can't get any more confirmation than that. So I told her, I said, I'm coming to speak at this church 30 minutes from you. We need to meet. And again, she was still hesitant, but I was like super excited. I got triple confirmation from above. I know this is from him. And she was like, this is weird. I said, you know what? I don't know why I know and you don't. I said, but I'm going to fast and I'm going to seek him and find out what this is all about. So I went on a 24-hour fast, and at the very end of the 24 hours, he showed me in my mind's eye the Red Sea parting. And he said, you're asking her to cross the sea, and she has no reason to believe it's going to part. And I was like, that makes sense. So I told her, I said, you know what? I just want to come meet you as a brother in Christ. No strings attached, just as a friend. And we'll see where it goes from there. And she was relieved because there was no pressure now. But we hit it off really well. And it was a very short period of time. I asked her to marry me. And we dated long distance from Tennessee to Florida for 2 years before we actually got married. I would go see her every 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later she would come see me. So while I was up there, we were looking for a place to go to fellowship, and she was actually in the Baptist church at the time. She had never been exposed to this walk, and I asked her at some point in time, I said, you know, if we do get married, do you believe it's your responsibility to follow me as long as I'm following him? And she said, yes. I said, well, we're going to be in good shape then. And I slowly started introducing things to her, like, you know, that's not his real name, right? And you know where these holidays come from, right? And it was a shock to her, but she searched it out herself, and she got it like it made sense to her. And everything about this walk she absorbed, and she realized that our fellowships and our meetings are different than what she was used to. You know, usually people in our walk, our fellowships are just like family oriented and fellowship around meals and things, and it was just real, you know. So anyway, while we were up there, we went to a couple congregations, and we found this one that we kind of liked. So the next time I was up there, I called them and said, hey, I'm in town again. Just wanted you guys to know we're going to come visit again. And they said, well, we're not going to be here this Sabbath. We're going somewhere else. And I was like, oh, okay. And they told me where they were going, and I did some research. And by the way, the Way documentary we watched it regularly at Restoration Ranch Ministry. When we bring people out of jail and detox or prison or homelessness, the first thing we ask them is, do they believe the Bible? Are they ready to surrender their lives completely to him? And if we teach you something out of the Bible that you believe is true, will you be obedient to it? And if they say yes, that's the criteria. That's what it takes to come into the program. And then immediately we start teaching them, you know, how to follow Yeshua. And I would say 98% of everybody that has ever come through Restoration Ranch believes in following Yeshua and keeping Torah. The only one, the other 2% are the ones that didn't stick around. But everybody that stays, 100% of everybody that stays for any duration of time leaves believing that they're supposed to follow Yeshua. What they do with that, that's between them and Yahweh. But people ask me what my success rate is. And of course, I tell them the success rate is 100% because my job is to teach them the truth. What they do with the truth is between them and him. So anyway, when I looked up this other ministry, I recognized Jason Tao. I said, man, that's the guy from that documentary we've been watching. So I reached out to Jason and introduced myself and told him that I was visiting my fiance in Tennessee, and that I was up from Florida. And so we went and visited there, and we really hit it off with him. Just he's a real good brother, and his family, just a beautiful family. So after that first visit, we went there every time. So every time we went back, I went back to Tennessee. And every time Chris and I went back after we got married and we went to visit her parents, we still went to Jason's congregation. So Chris and I got married, and she moved into the camper with me at Restoration Ranch in Jackson County. And Hurricane Michael came through. October 2018, we actually took the eye of Hurricane Michael. It devastated our area and everything around us. And I went into work. I couldn't get a phone signal. All the phones were down. All the cell towers were down, and we were buried under trees. Everything was buried, all the roads, everything. And after 3 days, I figured out how to, I had some solar panels in storage. I had been stocking up on those too. And I hooked solar panels up to a battery to the internet to get a satellite signal. And I used the internet to get calls. And I called my boss, and the first thing he said was, "Where have you been?" Didn't ask me how I was doing. Didn't ask me how my family was or anything. Just said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Man, I've been under trees for days." And he said, "Well, when are you coming to work?" So I brought some volunteers into work, immediately started getting the wastewater treatment plant back online, the lift stations back online, fixing things. The generators had been running for 3 days and they weren't running anything. They didn't transfer. So I got everything transferred. And when I still didn't have cell signal this time. So I actually ran into him after being there for hours. And the first thing he said was, "Where have you been?" And I said, "I've been getting everything turned back on. Nothing here is working. I've been saving you." And he came and got in my face and said, "Let me tell you something." And I said, "No, you're not going to tell me anything in my face like that." He said, "Why don't you go home without pay for 3 weeks?" I said, "Okay." Handed him my keys. And I felt like, I said, this is the time. This is what I've been waiting on. I went and bought a tractor, and we went into full-time tree service and storm cleanup. And we never went without a day of work. And the ministry just grew and grew and grew. And everybody in the community heard that there was a ministry helping people and getting trees off of roofs and cleaning up. And it just spread like wildfire. And really, we got in contact with property management companies that asked us to come do work. And then we got into remodels and flipping rentals for people. And so over in Milton, Florida, at a Congregation of Yahweh, Milton, their pastor had died a couple years prior, and the congregation just kind of fizzled out. And there was an elder that stayed and maintained the property and was trying to get things going, but he just couldn't really get it off the ground. And he was basically just a property manager for about 2 years, just watching the property and trying to keep things together. And he just decided that it wasn't his calling. And so he had heard of me. As a matter of fact, Jason came to speak at Milton, and they were trying to recruit people in the area, and people that had heard of the Way documentary and of Jason might come there and gather for fellowship and maybe get the church back going. About 70 people showed up, but the next Sabbath, nobody that came, showed up. So several months later, the elder, his name's Lindell, by the way, Lindell called me and asked if I would be interested in coming over to Milton and taking over. And I was like, no, not really. I'm happy where I'm at, doing what I'm doing. And I felt like I was going to retire on that farm. And then Jason called and said, "Hey, do you know that they're considering you to go over there and take over the Milton congregation?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm not really interested." And he said, "I think you need to pray about that." And I said, "Well, okay, I'll pray about it." And I told Chris, I said, "Why don't we go over there and check out the property?" We went and looked around, and it had housing there and a nice church already built and cabins. And it was already set up to be a feast-keeping congregation. There were 28 beds when we got there. And Chris, my wife, said, "Well, what did you think about the place?" And I said, "Well, it's got potential. What do you think?" She said, "Absolutely not. We're supposed to be on this farm. That's where we're called." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, if it's from him, then it doesn't matter what we want. We need to seek him and see what he wants." And so I was praying about it, and I was in the chapel one morning at Restoration Ranch, and I said, "Father, if this is from you and you want us to go to Milton, you're gonna have to tell me and give me a sign." And that voice again, He said, your answer's in the book. And I was like, no way. So I looked across the table, and there was a Bible. I reached across the table, I grabbed it, I plopped it open, and there was a page that was wrinkled up. That's why it opened to that page. And the first verse that caught my attention was 2 Corinthians 3:7. And it said, if the ministry of condemnation came in glory, then the ministry of the Spirit will come in much more glory. Obviously talking about the old covenant and the new covenant, but he was telling me that ministry faded away, and he wanted me to come and make it more glorious. And I told the elders about that verse, and they said, that's exactly what happened to this congregation. It became a ministry of condemnation, and it faded away. So I told my wife, I said, I think this is from him, and he wants us to go. So we immediately stopped Sabbath services at Restoration Ranch Ministry, and we started traveling 2 hours every Shabbat to get the services back going at that church. And we immediately just started. Well, actually, I posted to Facebook ads and stuff that we would be having a function at the congregation, and I would be speaking, and that recruited a few people. Now we've had just today we have anywhere from averages about 40 people every Sabbath, but we've had as many as 60 on a regular Sabbath and as many as 80 during the feast. We're traveling from Bascom, Florida to Milton, Florida to try and get the congregation on the ground. And right around this time, Hurricane Sally actually went through Milton, and we were already set up to do trees, and we had already, we were doing tree work in Bascom. And so when this hurricane went through, I said, well, since we're going over there to Milton already, let's go a couple days early, and we'll advertise that there's a ministry helping people. So I sent out a few advertisements that Restoration Ranch Ministry would be in the Pensacola, Milton area helping people, and my phone just started blowing up. So we were going over there every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then keeping Shabbat there, and then coming home, and then, doing the same thing for several weeks. And we were helping people for free, but if they wanted to donate, we would appreciate it. And a lot of people donated really nice, and some people didn't have anything, but we were helping people regardless. And a couple months later, somebody asked on a page, does anybody know anybody that can do trees? And this guy that we had helped said, you really need to call Restoration Ranch Ministry. So this person was a realtor, and we did a few jobs for her. She introduced us to other people, and it just spread like wildfire again. Now we're working for property management companies and realtors and doing flips and remodels. And we have more work over in this area than we ever had where we were from. And so as we loaded up a semi, it took us months to load up this semi with all of our stuff from Restoration Ranch. We ended up, somebody in the church found somebody that wanted our place. So we sold it, loaded up a semi, moved to Milton, and immediately just jumped into plenty of work. Didn't have to advertise or anything. And we've been busy every single day since. My wife's family came down to visit one weekend, and they decided that they wanted to be in Milton too. So they went home, put their house on the market, and it sold within 24 hours. Before it even hit the shelves, it was already sold. And while they were packing their things, a lot, like 3 houses down, somebody just put a sign up for a lot. 3 houses down from our church where we live on the property where the church is at. And I called her dad and I said, hey, there's a lot right down the street. Just put up a for sale sign. He said, give me the number. He called and he bought it right then. And they came and stayed with us for 9 months while they were building a house right down the street. And they live right, they moved from Tennessee too. They live right down the street from us. And her mom is all into this walk. And her dad, I think he's starting to come around. But they really enjoy following Yeshua, the way we do. Back to the farm story, just a little bit. We had a vision of building a house on the back of the farm and keeping the main house as the ministry. And we just didn't know how we were going to do it. Like, we were praying for some type of divine intervention or the right person hearing about it, something that would give us the ability to have our own place instead of living in a camper. And when Hurricane Michael came through, it actually cut our camper in half. A tree fell right in the middle of it. And we actually ended up taking a board and blocking off the bathroom and the main bedroom, and we were sleeping on the couch. And we didn't have power for several weeks. So I took a Sawzall and cut out the wall of the camper and snatched the faucet, the fixtures out of the shower so we could take showers outside. And again, we were just buried in trees. But when we got the call from Milton and we got the confirmation, then we knew this is the bigger thing that we were waiting on. This is what we were praying for.
So how many of the guys came with you how many did you semi-truck over to Milton?
Just a small handful. There wasn't that many. We had a year and a half to prepare. Okay. And there were certain people that were affiliated with the farm and were helping with the farm, but didn't necessarily want to travel and go with us and do what we were doing. So we gave everybody a heads up that we were about to make a move, and several people, went and did their own thing. And there was just a small handful of guys that came with us. I did want to tell you one other thing. I was telling Chris about how Yahweh spoke to me through 337 and how that number came up all the time. And she said, she thought it was kind of weird, And she called me one day and she said, "You're not going to believe this." And I said, "What's that?" And she sent me a picture of her standing in front of her office, and she had been in office number 337 for 18 years. Yeah.
And she didn't notice it.
She didn't notice it until I mentioned it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's what we're doing now. We have about 8 men right now. We just bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile home right down the road, and we turned it into a 5-bedroom, 2-bath, and that's probably going to help us expand to helping more people. We get guys that are just on the side of the road with a cardboard sign saying, "Please help." We explain the program to them and about surrender and giving everything to Him. And if they're truly wanting to surrender and they're not afraid to work, we help them. And everybody comes in, we take care of all of their necessities and things. Of course, you don't want to give a drug addict or an alcoholic a bunch of money straight out of, getting clean. But after they've been there a while and they prove themselves, they start getting paid. And the longer they're there, the more they get paid. And some of them actually can stay on as supervisors. And then some can go out and get a job and still stay with us. Our longest resident has been with us on and off for 7 years now. And he actually works as an electrician at the college, but he still works for us doing side jobs and stuff. We like to see someone stay at least a minimum of a year, but if they want to stay longer, they can. The longer they're there, the better, because that gives them endurance, more skills. And it was kind of a blessing that we left the farm behind, because not many people are going to get out of prison or off the streets and go to a farm job. Not saying it's not there, but it's more beneficial for men to learn how to do sheetrock and painting and construction, roofing and trees, man skills, knowing how to do man things, So when the guys get out of program, they have a really nice resume of all the skills that they learn, because we literally do everything, that from flooring to framing to painting, everything, texture, finishing sheetrock. And we also do sewer grinder pumps. That town, I still go back and work for them. I still do grinder pumps, and I teach the men how to fix the grinder pumps. So just recently on the Day of Atonement, I told the guys, I said, let's fast and reach out to other people. You know, in Isaiah it talks about, is this the fast that I have chosen? You know, but I've actually called you to basically pour out your soul into other people and feed the hungry and things like that. So it seems like the fast that he chooses is to focus on somebody else. So I said, let's go out and do evangelism on the Day of Atonement. So we went into the city and we're reaching out to just people on the streets and praying with people and passing out literature. And I said, you know what, let's go to the jail and just talk to the chaplain. I had called him a while back. So I called the chaplain and said, hey, I'm in town. I introduced myself to you a while back. Just wanted to see if you had a few minutes. And it was a very anointed conversation. Like you could just feel that his presence was there and he was in it. And this chaplain said, I want to get involved in what you're doing. I want to pour out into Restoration Ranch Ministry, and I want you to come into these jails. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Let's do it. So I'm actually scheduled to have a meeting with him this week, as a matter of fact. And the other pastor, I said, let's go to the other jail. So we went to the Milton jail, and I talked to this pastor, and he said, let's have a meeting sometime. And I said, okay. So we actually just had that meeting, and it went really well also. And he asked if I would come into the jails and teach a class. And I was like, sure, absolutely. And he asked what I would speak on. And before this meeting, I was praying for the Father to speak through me and not trying to meditate on what I would say, but just give me the words. And he said, if you did have a class, what would you speak about? And I said, well, I would probably start with the basics. You're saved by grace through faith, not works. But we are his workmanship, and faith without works is dead. And in Acts chapter 15, it says, when the Gentiles heard the gospel, their hearts were purified by faith. And I think that's what the Father is looking for, is a heart change. And as soon as I said that, he said, you just took the words out of my mouth. As long as you can stick to that, you can speak about anything that you want. So the door has been opened for us to go in. And obviously, we're going to tell these inmates exactly what I just said, but we're also going to tell him what the good works are. And that's following Yeshua, living and walking the way that he walked. So we're going to be meeting again soon to discuss me coming in one day a week. And also that's going to give us access to interview people right there on the spot and find out if they're truly sold out and if they truly are willing to give up everything and walk the way he walked. And I think that's when a person truly surrenders everything, that's when change takes place. But as long as we're holding back and we don't want to surrender things, that stunts our growth and our walk.
Wow. Well, it's a beautiful story that you have. I'm so glad that he pulled you out of what you were in, and he made himself real to you, and he showed himself to you in all these ways. Can you talk a little about this moment where you are saved, you are in the prison? This is when you're looking at the cross, right? And you like...
Yeah. Well, now, when I saw the cross and I saw the verse, that was just him manifesting his presence and showing me his power and how real he was. But the heart change actually took place a few days later when I came in crying and I heard that music and I said, I surrender all. I surrender everything to you. As soon as I said that, there was a weight lifted off of me. I mean, something was taken off of me, and I feel like it was the condemnation of my sin, the guilt of my sin. And I realized, I guess at that point, that he took that from me and that I was forgiven. But now, go and sin no more. And you know, I prayed over and over and over, please don't let me be deceived. I will speak your word until the day that I die, but please don't let me be deceived. And that's why I challenged everything. I compared everything that every religion you can think of, I came in contact with their doctrine, with their pamphlets, with their books. and I challenged them. And when I came to the truth of Yeshua and the feast days and being obedient, I couldn't refute it.
Why were you so concerned about being deceived?
Because I knew deception. There's too much confusion going on. Somebody's got to be deceived. There's only one correct interpretation of the Bible. There's a lot of interpretations, but there's only one that's correct. And being that there's so many different isms and schisms and everybody believes that they're right, somebody's got to be deceived.
So you talked about spending 5 years and 7 months in prison and looking at all these different religions. Is that kind of when you realize, oh wow, everyone believes something different. There's this million denominations. There's this many religions, and that's when you realize, oh yeah, somebody's got to be wrong.
Somebody's got to be wrong. Yeah.
So you prayed to find the truth.
Yeah. So I was on a quest, and I knew he was real, but I wanted to know who had the true interpretation of his word. And I would read, this ism and schism, and I was like, well, that doesn't line up with the word. And then I'd read this other ism and schism. Well, that doesn't line up with the word either. And, even I thought I was a Sabbath keeping Adventist that had the advantage over everybody else. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Yahweh's trying to tell me something about these feasts, and these people don't keep the feasts. And even though his name is not a salvation issue, I just noticed that people that used his name had a deeper truth than other people that didn't. And I've run into people in this walk that make the name and pronunciation of the name a legalistic issue. And I think that is the biggest disservice to this walk. We use his name to honor him, to respect him, and also to differentiate us from the falsehood. It's an obvious distinction, but it's not what makes us holy or righteous, and it's not an abracadabra thing that if you pronounce it just right, you're going to be in there. And there's people that actually believe that, and I think that's terrible. And I would like to say that at the Congregation of Yahweh, we have a rule. When people come in the door, we tell them, we're not here to tell you what you have to believe. But there are things that are divisive in this walk that people like to argue about and debate about. You can argue and debate about those things all you want. Just don't do it here. And don't bring it here. Leave all of that divisive stuff out by the road. And if it's not clearly stated from Genesis to Revelations, we're not going to discuss it. And we just leave it alone. And I believe that's why we're growing so much. And there's so much peace and love in our congregation, because we don't even bring up the things that everybody else divides and argues about. So if you want to believe in a different shape of the earth or a different pronunciation or a different calendar, that's fine. Just don't bring it here. And in Ephesians chapter 4, it says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit with the bond of peace. So that tells me that unity can be achieved through peace. It's through being peaceful, not through believing the exact same thing, not believing the exact same doctrine, but just being peaceful with each other. So if you have a different opinion about something, that's fine. I can be peaceful with you. But there is a foundation that I will not sway from, and that's Yeshua. And Yeshua wants us to be obedient. We're not going to debate it. We're going to stand on that foundation for sure. But all that divisive stuff that can't be proven, it's a waste of time. And it breaks up families. It breaks up congregations. And I tell people that, if it's not a salvation issue, why divide from your loved ones over it? Why divide from your church body over it if it has nothing to do with your entrance into the kingdom?
That's a good question. People shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So all right, you've been out now practicing this stuff, running this church and the Restoration Ranch for a while, and you've seen kind of the good and the bad and the ugly of this Torah movement. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about that movement, and do you have hope for it? Do you have hope that it's growing? Do you think it's on the right track, despite all of these divisive issues and so on?
Well, I think that the highly divisive, debatable, all the conspiracy things, some of that stuff might be valid, but I think that people will get to a state of maturity where they realize we're beating a dead horse. And, I have my thoughts about some of those things, but I put them on a shelf. It's not, it doesn't have any impact on my life or my salvation. It doesn't have good fruit attached to it. And all of these keyboard warriors that just bash people over the head with our truth is a huge disservice to this walk. But, believing in Yeshua and following him and wanting to be obedient and loving people, that's enough to keep me busy for the rest of my life. And if other people in this walk would just realize that if we spent more time on loving people and teaching people how to love, instead of spending hours and hours and hours and days and weeks on those hot topics, we would change the world.
Can you talk about teaching people how to love and loving people? It seems like you do that at Refuge Ranch. Do you have any, if you were to challenge the keyboard warriors to live that out, what would you say to them? What are some steps? Let's say they would like to do that.
Yeah.
But they never have.
Right.
You seem entrepreneurial or driven or all of the above, and you use those talents and leanings to do something that's changing people's lives and bettering the community. So let's say people don't have those leanings. What kind of encouragement or challenge?
I have some really good encouragement. Start in Matthew chapter 25. When he says he returns, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And he's going to tell the goats to go into punishment because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. And he tells them that when you didn't do it for the least of these, my brethren, you didn't do it unto me. But he tells the righteous, the sheep, he said, come into the kingdom because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink, etc. He didn't divide the sheep from the goats based off of their pronunciation of the calendar. He didn't divide the sheep from the goats on, this is the flat earth flock over here, and this is the globe earth flock over here. He didn't say, well, you guys got the calendar right. I want you to come into the kingdom, and you guys got the calendar wrong. You're not coming in. No, it was every criteria was how you loved other people. And the same people that boast these revelations about these divisive topics are mean and rude to other people that don't see it the way that they are. And I would say that rudeness and that lack of love is what's going to put you over there with the goats. So even if you do have these revelations about these conspiracies or the superior calendar, or you found Moses' tape recorder that has the correct pronunciation of Yahweh's name, or you've got your calendar just right, I don't think that is what's going to get you into the kingdom. So I would suggest that everybody that has this truth, that we're supposed to walk the way Yeshua did, examine your life and see how you're spending your time, how you're spending Yahweh's time. Are you using that to bless other people, to pour out your energy and your life and your love into the life of someone else that's in need? Or are you spending your time bashing people that believe the same way you do over insignificant topics or things that just aren't that important? There's people that spend hours and hours and hours on the divisive topic. They're not involved in a congregation. Their congregation is online. They're not in any type of fellowship. And they spend their time just bashing other people in this walk that have the same foundation. But where's the fruit of following Yeshua? And I think that we can all do it with just investing our time and energy in one person, trying to love on somebody and bring them to an encounter with the Holy Spirit and introduce them to the freedom that comes from Yeshua. And anytime I'm out in public or on the street and I'm witnessing to somebody, I always pray for them and lay hands on them and ask for the Father to pour out his Spirit on them. And I'm praying for them to have one of those encounters like I had. And I believe that him revealing his presence to people will draw them. So, and I would encourage people to do that. When you're out praying for somebody, pray for the Spirit to be poured out on them right then. Pray for it. And I've had people tell me they didn't believe, that they were atheists. And I said, if you felt his presence, would that change your mind? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, let's pray. And I pray and say, Father, I pray that you just pour out your Spirit on this man. And all of a sudden he'd go, and he would feel his presence and say, I believe. Just like that. People that had no belief in anything higher than themselves, one prayer and his presence being manifested to them, it changed their life and they became believers. But so that's how we show our love is reaching out to people that are in need. But another way to show your love is when somebody disagrees with you, not act like a horse's patoot to them. And realize that it's okay to see things differently. As long as we have the same foundation, it's okay.
Absolutely. I won't keep you forever, so I just have a couple more, but
sure.
Do you have any advice? You have spent a lot of time seemingly mentoring men. Do you have advice on being a good mentor and how to mentor people in spiritually and in life?
Yeah. I think it's very important for all believers to know their Bible better than anything. We need to have the verses in our hearts. When people ask questions, we have to have a defense for what we believe. We have to know why we believe what we do and be ready to give an answer. And being an example. You know, if somebody comes into your congregation and they see everybody loving on each other and being genuinely compassionate about each other and each other's needs, that's going to attract anybody. But if they come into your congregation and they see backbiting and gossip and contention over non-salvation issues, that's going to push them away. So leading by example and loving each other is priority number one. Now, these guys that are coming out of jail and detox and prison and all that, I don't treat them like they're a resident in my facility. I treat them like they're my brothers. I don't treat them like they're lesser people. I take them fishing. I take them camping. We eat meals together. And I treat them like a family member or a brother, not like a lesser person. And they know immediately that I sincerely love them. And I watch men come in broken with, scrawny, very little body weight, no man skills, and over a year or more time, I watch them gain their weight back. I watch them start learning man skills, and a lot of them learn, just manners and housekeeping and things that they just didn't have growing up. And they keep each other accountable. So you've got senior residents that bring the newer residents under their wing and teach them what they've been taught. And we gauge their success in the program by their understanding of the Bible. So they have a sheet of about 40 different foundational truths that they need to study out. They've got the chapter where the answer is found right beside the question, and they go in the Bible and they read that chapter until they find the answer to the question. And every once in a while, we'll do a checkup test, and we'll see how they do on their tests. And if the Spirit draws somebody to the truth and brings the truth to their remembrance and teaches them the truth, if they're not learning the truth, then we know there's a disconnect between them and the Spirit. So that's how we gauge whether they're getting it or not.
All right, where can people find you then? Tell us any links or emails that people could reach out or check out the ministry.
Okay. We have Restoration Ranch Ministry united.com, which it's still in the construction phase of converting from farm ministry to what we're doing now, but there's still access there. We have Restoration Ranch Ministry Facebook page. We also have United. We started calling the congregation the United Congregation of Yahweh. And there's a little bit of a story there, if you don't mind. The congregation I went to in Panama City, they were sister congregations with Milton 20 years back, and they had a split over a doctrinal issue. They broke up and broke fellowship. And I was still going to Panama City at the time. We would actually do Sabbath service on the farm, Restoration Ranch, and every once in a while we'd go back to Panama City and we'd bring the whole crew there. So when we took the call at Milton, we brought the congregations back together. And Panama City, the following tabernacles came to Milton, and it was the first time they had been there in 20 years. So we united the congregations. So anyway, it's called, the legal name is still Congregation of Yahweh, but we call it the United Congregation of Yahweh. So we have that on YouTube, and we also have United Congregation of Yahweh Milton Facebook page and a website, United Congregation of Yahweh Milton website.
I may ask you to send me links to those, and then I'll just link them.
Yep.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to anyone out there?
Yeah, I would like to say that if there's anybody out there that has a loved one that's struggling with addiction, or a family member or a friend that you might know, somebody that is struggling with their addiction, if they're sick and tired and they're fed up and they really want help, we can help them. And we're not like, the mainstream. We're going to teach them how to follow Yeshua, and we're going to teach them man skills so that they'll have the ability to get a good job when they're done with the program. And as long as we have, as far as I know, we've never turned anybody down that truly wanted help. Even when we didn't have bed space, we made space. So, and that's what we're trying to do now is make more space. So if anybody needs some help, please reach out to me, and we can do an interview with that person, and we'll try to get them some help.
That's so great, man. That's so great. So how many guys are there now?
There's about eight now, and we have about 5 or 6 on the waiting list. Oh, and that's another beautiful thing. I do have to share this. I'm sorry. I go into the courts now, and I talk to judges, and I talk to DAs, to the district attorneys, and I talk them out of sending people to prison to come to our program. Really? Yes. We had a gentleman that they were adamant about sending him to prison for 4 years. He was a repeat offender for DUIs. And he called me, he was homeless and had nowhere else to turn. And I went to the court for him, and the district attorney said, I don't want him in a program. He's a criminal. He deserves to be punished. And I spoke for him. I said, Judge, I really feel like this man has potential and he has an addiction, and I really feel like I can help him. And the district attorney said, nope, I'm not going with it, not doing it. And the judge said, you're probably right. He probably does deserve 4 years in prison. So I'm going to give him 4 years in prison, but I'm going to suspend his sentence. And if he finishes this program, I'm squashing it. He finished the program, and they squashed it. It was done. And he's the one that's been with me for 7 years. And I've got about 5 or 6 guys right now that they're waiting for me to go to court and speak for them. And all I ask them is, are you ready to surrender? All.
Okay, I have more questions now. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
What does it take to make people surrender all? And man, that guy had all the DUIs, but he didn't change until you went to bat for him and he was in with you, living with you. How do you change these guys when you're with them? Like, I have friends who are addicts, and nothing seems to get through to them.
Well, they're not going to change until they are sick and tired and completely ready. And even when they're completely ready, it's still tricky. So when they come into the program, we have to keep everything tight knit. Anytime the guys go somewhere to the store, they got to go in twos. They got to go in pairs. That keeps them accountable. No two new residents go anywhere by themselves. They've got to have a senior resident with them. And what we're doing is we're keeping them in a protected environment away from the allurement of drugs. Even in gas stations now, you can buy THC. You can buy kratom, which is kind of like a synthetic opium. So there's ways people can get high legally, and we try to protect them from that. We do have 10-panel drug tests. We also test for fentanyl, kratom, and we have a breathalyzer. So they know that random tests could happen, and we're zero tolerance. Every once in a while, we might give somebody some grace for slipping up, but it's not the norm. And generally, we tighten up the reins just a little bit tighter if that happens. So the key to these people is time. They need to be saturated in the Spirit. They need to be saturated with the truth. And the longer they're here, the more endurance they have. You know, the Bible talks about we glory in tribulation because tribulation worketh patience. That word patience actually means endurance. So when we're going through difficult times, we're building up endurance. So I tell these guys, every time that voice comes to your mind and says, get you a beer, say no. You're building up endurance. The more endurance you have, the stronger you are in the Spirit to say no. So I've been in this walk since 2003. And to this day, I'll still have a little voice telling me, go do this, you know, get you a drink. Nobody's going to know. But it's much easier because my endurance is great and I stay strong in the Spirit. But there's always any door that these men have ever opened, whether it be a door of meth, a door of crack, a door of pornography. Through the power of the Spirit, they can close those doors, but they still have free will. If they want to, they can open the door again, but they have to stay strong enough in the Spirit to tell the flesh no. And that's what we're doing. We're giving them time, endurance, know-how, and scripture on how to live. And, you know, people ask, well, are you in a 12-step program, or do y'all do 12 steps? And I'm like, well, no, all the steps are pretty much in the Bible. You got to be on step 3 before you even come in the program, which is to believe in him, to know you got a problem, and ready to surrender everything to him. That's the first 3 steps.
How can you tell if someone's ready to surrender? Like when you in the prisons, you said you were looking to possibly identify guys that would be good fit. How can you tell that they're surrendered to him?
Well, well, they might not necessarily be surrendered when I ask them. I ask them if they're ready to surrender.
Okay.
I ask them about their past. Ask them if they believe the Bible. You know, what do you know about the Bible? What's your favorite verse? And just to know if they know anything of the Bible. In most cases, most people don't know about the Bible. But I tell them, I'll say, listen, if you're just coming here to get out of trouble, this is not the place for you. If you're just coming here to get off of drugs, this is not the place for you. If you're coming here to have a life-changing experience that will set you free from all that stuff, and you want to live for him and follow him for the rest of your life, we can help you. But if you're faking, you're not going to make it. I'm going to sniff you out and you're going to be gone. So make sure before you make this commitment, you are 100% sold out, ready to live for him, to breathe him, to speak his word, and represent him on this earth for the rest of your life. And some of them are like, whoa, man, I'm not ready for that. I'm just trying to get off of dope. Or I'm just trying to get out of trouble. You know, if that's the case, then there's other places that can help you get out of trouble. There's other places, you know, You could probably go work a program somewhere. But this is about following Yeshua. Basically, what we're teaching them is how to unplug from the life of the world, unplug from darkness, unplug from addiction, and plug in to Yeshua and stay plugged in. And as long as you stay plugged in, you're going to be free. If you continue in my word, then you will know the truth. You'll be my disciples. You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So we believe staying in the truth, staying plugged in, you'll be set free. It's a simple formula, and it worked for me.
Man, Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's good to meet you.
Yeah.
If you love what we're doing and want to support this, join us on Patreon. We meet once a month, the last Thursday of every month, and these meetings are getting more and more in depth and deep and fun. And I'm meeting so many new people, and it's always a blast. Go to patreon.com/thelifewithluke.